Hi, my name is Ken. I'm an alcoholic. Good to be here with all you folks. This is exciting. I was sitting there looking at this thing. It looks like Steven Spielberg, doesn't it? Strange Encounters. They finally come to take us all home, you know? It's like, do, 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 do. Well, anyway, that's what it looked to me. I'm glad I still get those flashbacks. It's nice to know. And I like the little safety net here. If you don't like what I say, by the time you get here, I'm in Chattanooga. That's just very good. You know, every now and again, you get a chance to realize you're an alcoholic. And I had one of those chances. I mean, it's like you always know you're an alcoholic. But you kind of, well, I'll tell you this story. Last week, I was on a plane, and I was going home from Waco to San Diego. And there was a storm coming in. And we hit this storm, even though the pilot tried to avoid it. And the plane was just like dropping and spinning, and people were like, no, even the flight attendants weren't allowed up, and they said, get in your seats and make sure you're chained and all that good stuff. And the plane was dropping, and it was twisting, and there was weather, and the guy next to me said, I'm feeling a little green. And I was enjoying the hell out of it, it was like, wow, this is what flying should be about. Not that, if you want to get up and walk around the cabin crap, this is what it should be about. Boom, boom, I was sitting there thinking, I hope we never get home. This is this was so exciting to me. And then I figured to myself, the thoughts that come through your head, I figured, when we land, they can't give me a ticket. I wasn't riding this, I wasn't driving, I'm just a passenger. And then they served a meal about 2 hours into the flight because, it was like, and the guy next to me, and I had like sourdough rolls up the yin-yang, and I was like, just eat. And I'm thinking, boy, this is great. These people don't know what it is to be sick. Like I remember trying to get food down when it was coming up, I mean, isn't this exciting? I mean, when I got home, I talked about that flight for 2 days. I thought, oh, wow. In fact, had I had the money and the time, I would have gone a flight gone back. I would have turned around. Let's get, we can catch it, catch the last part of it going back. But that's the way I like to live, There's a T-shirt that I love. In fact, someone pointed out to me, it's a No Fear T-shirt, and I bought one, and on the back it says, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space, And I love people who are trying to, put together security, and, put together security in this world is like housekeeping in a dream, There's no correlation. And everything here is so perceptional. I have my perception of things, and the world is changing so fast that I can't even keep my perception up with what's going on. I mean, that's how fast it's happening. If I didn't have Alcoholics Anonymous to come to, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I always had this communication problem. I remember my wife would wake me up in the middle of the night sometimes and say, there's somebody outside. And I said, good, that's where they belong. That's why we have, that's why we have outside, When they come inside, give me a buzz. I'll be happy to go check and see what's going on, And God loved that woman. She was always trying to say things to me, like to communicate with me. She would say, like, that's your second drink. Ooh, And I'd say, honey, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and finish your breakfast. It's like it's like, that's just the way it was. And this July, God willing, I'll be sober 25 years, and I still think like that. I had my car stolen in March, and I had to make out a police report, so one of those guys had to come to my house, and they said, write down what happened. So I wrote down, I drove to work, I came out, my car was gone. I mean, how much can you write? His first question was, who was the last one to see your car? I said, the guy who took it. He said, Mr. Devaney, these are serious questions. I said, Mr. Officer, these are serious answers. Like, who else would have been the last one to see it? I get sober with guys, and I still hang out with guys. We're not the brightest bulbs in the room, but that kind of question wouldn't play, And I thank God I hang around with guys, as I said, they come up with these great ideas. A guy asked one night, he says, why is there a light on my vacuum cleaner? And the other guy said, in case the electricity goes off. You know, like, hey, it made sense to me. You know? Yeah, if you got a house that you need a light to see the dirt, then why clean? You know, like that doesn't make any sense at all. And that's just the way my mind, you know, it's going like that all the time. You know, it's just vibrating like that. It's kind of like, you know, the three alcoholics who were coming out of a mental institution. And the psychiatrist called them in and said, okay, before you guys get home, I got to ask you one simple question. He said, how much is 3 times 3? So the first alcoholic says, 118. Yeah, I think you might have to stay a day or two. He said to the second one, how much is 3 times 3? And he said Tuesday, defiantly. I think you may have to stay just a wee bit. Said to the third one, how much is 3 times 3? And the guy said 9. He said, that's terrific. He said, how did you get that? He said, I just subtracted Tuesday from 118. You know? You know, and I can relate to that. You obviously can too, because that's the way I think. You know, like I had a guy call me a couple of weeks ago. He said, Ken, he says, does this shirt go with these pants? I said, sure. Then I hung up, you know. I saw him at the meeting. He thought he looked cool. You know, but I mean, fortunately, my life has become so simple because I did these things called the steps. You know, I don't know about you guys, but when I took the steps, what happened to me was I realized for the first time in my life that I was living under an assumed identity in a state of delusion. And as I took the steps removed the props from my life. It just kind of just said, you can't have that anymore. This won't work. This won't work. This won't work. And as it removed those things, I got to see what was really real. And it was surprising how I got to meet me for the first time. You know, I love Alcoholics Anonymous because it's the only disease that I know of where we have steps that when you take them, it prevents the disease from making you sick. And I love that. I just love that. I don't know of other people who get that kind of a shot. You know, and I know when you first come in, your perception is just like mine. It's wacko. I used to get up there, and I hear newcomers share this all the time, so, and I did it one time too. You come in and you say, well, my name is so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic, and I lost everything, and I have nothing. Well, I said that too. And after about 10, 15 years, what became very, very clear to me is that the everything that I lost turned out to be nothing. And the nothing I was left with has turned out to be everything. You know, just that simple. Just that simple. And I watch folks running around and want to get materially successful right away. You know, it's like watching somebody climb the material ladder, and when they get to the top, they realize that the ladder's on the wrong wall. You know, it's hey, so that's just the way it is, you know. This is about growing spiritually. It's always been about growing spiritually. We talk about it at meetings, you know. The whole idea is to become conscious of His presence. And the whole idea also is to recognize that there's a power greater than yourself. And I'm always amazed when people just click onto that, you know. Like, oh, that's what they mean. You know, that's what's real exciting about this, because you can hear that numbers of times and it doesn't mean anything. And then all of a sudden, boom, it means something. And in the meantime, you got to keep people from getting spread out in too many different directions, running around. So that's why we have meetings. We have meetings so you can come and you can get a little respite from you. You know, meetings are like speed bumps. They slow you down a little bit. You know what I'm saying? I watched some guy tell me last week that the oil lamp in his car came on. He said, the oil lamp in my car is on. I said, what did you do? He said, nothing. I said, when are you going to do something? I don't know. See, I have a mind like that. I used to have the oil lamp come on in my life, and I would rotate the tires. You know, like I was, you know, it wasn't like it was a bad move. It just wasn't addressing the problem. I just didn't know how to address the problem, you know. People would say, you know, maybe you ought to do something about your drinking. And so what I would do is like taper off or taper on, or, you know, whatever you did, you know, alter it, whatever you did. But I didn't stop. I never heard stop. I always heard curtail at best. And then when I came into AA, it's been so exciting. And I'm part of a thing now. I hope some of you come out to San Diego to the International in the end of June and beginning July. As of last week, we had about 35,000 pre-registered from about 90-some countries. We get some great letters from people who are coming from like Poland who've never been at a meeting larger than 6 people. And now they're coming to America. Coming to America. I'm sorry. It's the other voice. And so the deal is you get to read these letters and realize, wow, this is an unbelievable thing, and also the fact is that you get to read what happened at past conventions. When they had the convention in Montreal, some of you may already know this, but that's the home base of Secrum 7. And when the AA convention was there in '75, I believe it was, they lowered all their flags to half-mast. It was like, they're in town, and they're not buying, you know. And it was just like, I mean, you get to be part of all of that, and you realize this is going to be exciting. I mean, and you have all these little committees. The opening night, there's going to be 4 dances, and they figure there's going to be 60 to 70,000 people at those 4 dances. And you think, wow, this is Alcoholics Anonymous. And it just hit me that as you were talking about 50 years of joy here in San Antonio, today is May 12th. Today is 60 years ago was when Bill and Bob met for the first time, Mother's Day of 1935. This is the day. This is May 12th. You know, and it didn't click for Bob, as we know. But then the following month, he got sober, and that's the official anniversary date of Alcoholics Anonymous, June 10th. And you say, wow, isn't this exciting? And I remember how when I first got here, if you knew, none of this applies to you. You know, just go to sleep for a minute, and then we'll get you back in later. You know, but when you knew, none of this stuff means anything. I remember a guy said to me, "We're going to be a little bit late going to the diner tonight." I said, "Why?" He said, "I want something I want to show you." So he took me down, and we got in front of a brownstone on Clinton Street in Brooklyn. And he says, "See that house?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's where Bill and Lois started AA in New York." I said, "We are going to have time to go to the diner?" You know, like, what does this mean to me? It didn't mean anything, because I had no connection with what was going on. I mean, it didn't mean anything. And then suddenly you realize that, hey, there's a history here. Alcoholics Anonymous is going to be 60 years old. Most folks in the room aren't 60 years old. And you realize this is the continuity of sobriety. This is what keeps people coming back. Nobody knows what's going on. When somebody knows in AA what's going on, they usually go and get drunk. I watch the old timers and they say, "I don't know." And sometimes they just grunt. You know, and what they tell you is so minimal. Go to meetings. Oh wow, that's a creative thought. You know, don't drink. Oh yeah, well this is real hip stuff. And you realize that as you stay here longer, there's no need to know. Really, what there is a need to practice the program in all areas of your life. I mean, I have become more and more aware of the fact that someday everything in my life as I know it, and everyone in my life will be taken away. That's the impermanence of what goes on. That's just life. And in the meantime, I want to live my life in such a way that I don't have any regrets about any of those people or any of those events or any of those days. I don't want to regret the way I lived, and I sure as hell don't want to regret the way I died. I want to make every day count. And to make every day count, I have to be sober, because when I'm not sober, the days don't count. I don't know about you folks, but when I look back over my life, I see that even when I came into AA, there's a distinction in AA, and we don't talk about it a whole lot that I hear, but there's a distinction between activity and action. The program says into action. You know, setting up chairs is important, making coffee is important, but those are activities. They keep you connected until you can take the action. And you'll know it's an action because the action helps you grow spiritually. You know, at the end of the day, if all you did was make a lot of coffee, you could probably catch on at Denny's. I mean, that's a whole different deal. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I found in my life, in my sobriety, that what was happening is my days were going by, and when I looked at them honestly, when I did the 10-step, they were filled with routine, distraction, entertainment, and mostly repetitive action, just doing the same stuff over and over again. I had to grow spiritually if I was going to be happy, joyous, and free. And I started to do that early on, fortunately, because people directed me towards the steps. And now today, a lot goes on. I still don't know what most of it is. But now I don't care. I was sitting at the end of a table the other night where one guy has 50 years of sobriety. One guy had 40 years. And then I was there, and the guy came over and he said, I wish I had the knowledge that existed at the end of this table. And the guy who had 50 years said, the only thing we're sure of at this table, kiddo, is we don't know. And you can bet on that. Because there's always something else evolving, it's like always something else happening. And it gets to be real exciting because you think you know, but then you find out you don't know. Then you find out there's no need to know. And that's when you really start to enjoy life, when you just get up in the morning and say, hey, there's no need to know. I don't know. And self-help books, oy vey. I'm going to write a book, and the title of it's going to be, I'm an ass, you're an ass. And it will be a great self-help book. You all can have your own chapter. And then when somebody says anything, you say, hey, what do you expect? I'm an ass. Takes the pressure off right away. You don't have to figure out anything. I remember running around trying to find out who I was at a meeting, and a guy pushed me in a corner, and he said it so eloquently. He said, Ken, be what you is, and not what you ain't. Because if you is what you ain't what you is. And I thought, why didn't someone in school tell me that? Why didn't someone tell me early on? It was so clear. I understood that. Be what you is and not what you ain't. I was so busy being what I wasn't that I didn't know what I was. And then when I got here and people started talking about who are you, I really didn't have any identity. Now I'm pretty good at this stuff. I have a license, I have a checkbook, and they both have the same address. And the miracle of AA is I live there. I actually live there. I mean, it makes you wonder sometimes, like you say, wow, isn't this exciting? I got out of this bed yesterday, And I go to work, and I have a job, and I show up, and I do it on a regular basis. And people say, how does that work? And I say, I don't know, I'm just there, I don't know. I just show up and I'm there. And that's the deal. I have no idea what's going on. And I go to a noontime meeting every day in San Diego. And when you're out, hopefully you'll get a chance to visit. It's called Drunks Only. And it's a great little meeting. It's only an hour long from 12 to 1. And we start by reading how it works. And then somebody reads a little bit of the big book. And that becomes the topic of discussion. And we don't call on volunteers until the last 5 minutes of the meeting, and we don't call on you if you came in late because we want it to be focused on the reading. And you'd be surprised how many people hear the big book for the first time, little bits of the piece like that at a meeting. A guy said a couple of weeks ago, he said, I didn't know how it works that we read at the meeting was in the big book. Like you say, oh yeah. I mean, most meetings say this is from chapter 5 of the big book, and then they read it. I didn't know it was in there. Okay, Dick Tracy, But the whole idea that I have found is that, I can just do in my own life what I can do. The only thing I own in this life that I can see today are the consequences of my action. I don't own anything else. I just own the consequences of what I do and the consequences of what I don't do. And I've learned that in Alcoholics Anonymous. I just don't have anything else. And I learned to connect everything to the moment, living in the moment. The gift that you guys gave me in sobriety is the gift of the present moment. I never had the gift of the present moment. I was always running off to the future, visiting the past, redoing things that I couldn't redo, worrying about things that hadn't happened, and I didn't know about living in the gift of the present moment. And now I've set up a whole support system for that. When my phone rings, and it rings a lot throughout the day, I never pick it up on the first ring. I wait to the second ring. And on the first ring, when I hear the phone, it's a good time for me to stop and say, thank you, God, for the gift of sobriety today. And then I pick up the phone. And every time the phone rings, I get a chance to be grateful. Every time I'm at a red light now. Red lights do the same thing. So instead of having meditation for me that takes place at 10 seconds or 10 minutes in the morning, I have it throughout the whole day because I'm trying to practice this thing all the time. I'm trying to maintain a conscious contact with God as I understand Him. My big problem always was, and it always is, I forget. I just forget. I get busy doing something else, and I think that's the primary importance. And then, boom, I forget. And what these things help me to do is they help me to remember. And I hang out with guys who are just off the wall. We had a guy the other day who was telling a story where he wanted to get in with these guys and be a big shot with them, so he told them where some dope was and booze. And they went and they got it, and they broke into this house. It was his house. But this was a way for him to ingratiate himself with the guys, like, yeah, anything to be accepted, anything to be the big wheel. And when I come to these conventions, and you folks all weekend long, you're going to have great speakers. You got Keith and Sue and a bunch of people from California, and then Joe on Sunday. You're going to hear a whole variety of stuff. And you know what? It's going to be the experience they had, because this is what we share here. We share our experience, strength, and hope. And when you first come to Alcoholics Anonymous, how many of you have less than a year? Can I see that in the room? Wow, great. Welcome. That's terrific. I don't know how you guys feel about sobriety, but in the first year, I was kind of like John Wayne Bobbitt, When he asked if he wanted to get back with his wife, and he said, one part of me says yes, and one part of me says no, I mean, I wanted to get sober, I just didn't want to do any of the stuff you guys were doing. I mean, it seems so repetitive. I mean, and my sponsor used to go to me, okay, you told me that yesterday, you got anything new? And the nice part about that is I've learned through experience. I am firmly convinced through my own experience that when I arrived in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I get to see this with new people I get the privilege of working with all the time, when you first arrive here, like you folks in the first year, you really don't know if this will work for you. You really don't know. You have a belief that it will, but you really don't know. And one of the things you'll find out about beliefs is belief is not reality. You can have all the beliefs you want, but it doesn't make it reality. And so when you first get here, you don't know if this thing is going to work. But what happens is if you do the drill, you go to meetings, you work with others, what happens is that experiment on the outside, will this work or won't it, suddenly gets internalized and it becomes your experience. Your experience is I was sober on the 11th, and so far I've been sober on the 12th. God willing, I'll be sober on the 13th. But by doing the stuff that we do here, you get that experience. And things are changing all the time. I have the kind of mind that if it's real good, I don't want it to change. But if it's real bad, I can't wait for it to change. And thank God that everything is changing all the time, whether we think it is or it isn't. And if it wasn't changing all the time, then our slogan would say, this too shall last. And that's not what we say. We say, this too shall pass, and it's a deal. I looked at your book up here that you had, Pass It On, and I remember the first time I read that book, and on the cover it says, on the flap of that book, it says, here's Bill W., a man everybody knew and a man nobody knew. A man everybody knew and a man nobody knew. Right on the flap of that book. And I thought, boy, that's true of a lot of us. People think they know us and they really don't know us because we don't know who we are. We're so busy pretending to be something, we don't know who we are. And I like being part of this whole scenario because I need the reinforcement. I need the reinforcement on a daily basis. I don't know about you guys, but I still hear things crazy. You know, it's like that Emily the Teller. Remember, she used to be on Saturday Night Live? And she used to say, "Why are you so concerned with flea erections in South America?" And they'd say, "No, Emily, that's free elections." You know? And she would say, "Never mind," you know. And that's the way I was. I never heard it quite the way people were saying. And my mom, who knew me better than anyone, didn't want me to think at all. She used to say, every time you think, you place some part of the world in jeopardy, you know? And when most kids were taught and encouraged to think, my mom would come through the living room, and if I had my feet up on the end table and I was thinking, she'd turn the TV on and say, "Watch it," you know? Because she just knew that I had this ability to just take ideas that sounded so good in my head, but in reality, they were just crazy. They were just crazy. I mean, I remember one time I thought I could make a living selling hearing aids over the telephone. You know, that was like, I'll start a little business. I'll call, hello, you know, like, it sounds good up here, but when you put it into practice, it's like, you know, it's comparable to liver on a stick. You know, it's like, what are you doing? You know? I can remember being arrested where I had no idea what I was doing, and somebody was booking me, and they were asking me real basic questions, and I was off somewhere else. You know, I was just off somewhere else. And the guy would be trying to help you out. He'd be trying to get you in and get you out. And I didn't understand that. I just never understood that. I remember one time I was in a lockup, and a guy came in, and we were visiting, and they were going home, and I said to the guy, "How do you know if you're an alcoholic?" And he said, "It's real easy, Kent. See the visitor lamp?" He said, "When it goes off, these guys go home." I never figured that out. I used to never be able to see my role in what was going on. I mean, you know, after a while you stay in the same area, you end up in the same places, getting locked up for the same garbage, and you look around and you say, "My God, there's Patty again. He probably here for drunk driving. And there's so-and-so. He probably beat up his wife again." And you think these guys would learn, you know. And it just never occurs to you that you're there, you know. And you know these guys, you know, like, and you're like, you just can't understand that, you know, like, geez, are these guys slow or what, you know, like, and you can't relate to it because you just have this whatever it is. And I remember my sponsor sitting me down and saying, you know, we're going to go through these steps, and we're going to take them just the way they are in the big book. And we're going to read them together, and we're going to do them together, and we're not going to make up any new stuff. We're going to stay focused right on this. And as we went through it was like every time we finished a step, whatever step it was like suddenly there was another, like, going for something else. There was more to be done. And I knew that if I stopped, I may never start again. And I knew if I stopped, I might turn around and go back, because it was easier always for me to give up. I never wanted to face the consequences of what I did with my life. You know, I never wanted to do that. I always felt someone else should take the rap for it. And finally in AA I learned that this is a place where you take the consequences of your actions. And not only what you do, but what you don't do. And it gets to be real relaxing here after a while. You know, you sit back with the old geezers in the back, and you become an old-timer almost by osmosis here. I know when you're an old-timer now because someone says there's too much crack in AA, and you find yourself pulling up your pants, you know, like it's you know you've been here too long, you know. And you get to listen to people, and you realize that everybody's got something to say if you give them a chance to say it. And it's about loving and caring. You know, I had a son who was out touring the world, doing exactly what he wanted to do. And in July of that year, I got a call. And he was real sick, and they were sending him home to me. And when he arrived home, he was in AIDS, full-blown AIDS. And I picked him up at L.A. airport on July 8th, and by September the 7th, not quite 2 months later, he was dead. And I got a chance to see this boy that I had raised as a single parent, took to high school, watched him go off to college and come home, lay in a bed, and deteriorate day by day, losing his hearing, his eyesight, and eventually his mind. And I got to see his spirit grow each day as his body got weaker. It was a phenomenal thing to observe. And I knew then that God had a great sense of humor, because right in the middle of all of this trauma, there were a lot of yucks, you know. I knew God had a great sense of humor because my ex-wife started coming to my house. I mean, that was hysterical, you know. I got to meet my husband-in-law, you know. You know, it was like, isn't this exciting, you know? And I got to see the fact that, you know, my mom used to have a saying. She said she never saw a hearse with a U-Haul attached to it. And I got to see that if you're spiritually okay, you're okay regardless of what's going on around you. You have doubts at times, you have concern, but you're generally okay. And I got to see that one action can mean two things for two different people. My son had neuropathy real bad, and they couldn't control the pain of that. And he went from 190 pounds down to about 118, 19 pounds. And he was so bony that he couldn't sit on a bedpan. And so I got to watch him, which was amazing to me, roll out of bed and crawl on the floor to the bathroom, because he was trying to maintain his dignity. And I put blankets and comforters and pillows down so that his knees wouldn't hit the carpeting too sharply. And as a parent, to watch that, it became painfully apparent to me that I crawled on the floor and lost my dignity. And here was my son crawling on the floor and maintaining his dignity. And so crawling on the floor is neither good nor bad, and most things are neither good nor bad. It's how you internalize them into your life. And you know, being aware is a whole different thing for me today. I never knew what it was to be aware. I was so busy, focused on running around doing a lot of activity, that I didn't know what it was to be spiritually focused. And I've had that experience. I wish I had it all the time, but I don't. But I get occasional glimpses of it. And when I get those glimpses, I get to see how important life is, and how important each day is, and each moment is. And so I don't waste opportunities when I'm with people to tell them I love them if I love them. You know, because when they leave, you may not see them again. You know, at these conventions tonight, there's an assemblage here. And next year, this won't be the same assemble. It will be there'll be different people here. Some of them won't make it for one reason or another. Some won't be here. Some will be out drinking. Some will be dead. Some will have loved ones. But that's what life is, and it's learning to let go all the time. I didn't know that. See, I always thought it was about control. You did what you had to do. I remember as a kid, I lived in a neighborhood where there's a lot of control factors. In fact, there was a guy who was, at that time, the head of, in quotes, the mafia. And when he came onto the street, they never even said his name. They used to just say, he's on the street. And you would immediately grab glass. You'd look in a store window, because whatever was going to happen quick, and it was going to happen behind you. And this way you wouldn't be a witness to it. And that's the way I lived my life, not wanting to be a witness to what was going on. And today, as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been able to expand my life, to look at a lot of things. Not think about a lot of things, but just be aware of a lot of things. And it's exciting. I mean, it's real exciting. As I said, when my alarm goes off in the morning, I get up and I want to go do something. I want to screw something up. I don't want to lose my skills. You know, I want to go and just do it, you know. And I understand the importance of each day, so I don't get hung up with all the nonsense, you know. I mean, I hang out in L.A. I hang out in San Diego while this thing is going on in L.A. with O.J. I hang out with guys who can't even spell DNA, you know. You know, and so we don't get hooked up in the news, you know, but I watch folks that try to force that stuff on you. They watch the news and they watch this, and all they want to tell you is what's wrong. This is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and there's more wrong than that. And, you know, and I don't watch that crap. You know, I don't like to watch anything like that. Now, if you want to watch it, that's your business. I'm not bringing you into my tent. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to go to bed knowing I try to do something, not learn something about something that's negative. And then you get into bed and you say, "Oh, what a great day. I followed the trial, the explosion, the hijacking, the shooting, oh, wow. I can't wait to get up tomorrow." More will be revealed, wow, And I just don't watch that stuff. And when people say to me, "Have you seen that?" I say, "No. And please don't tell me about it. If I wanted to watch it, I'd watch it myself." And I get a chance to laugh a lot because everything that's going on around me is funny. I mean, I was in a little Walmart store, and some woman was on the end of a long line, and I just walked up with a cart. And the guy happened to say to me, "I'll take you." As soon as she heard that, she came from the end of her line at about 90 miles an hour, with this look like, "If you get in my way, you're dead," So, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I do step 10. I cease fighting everyone and everything. I'm in a total state of neutrality, So I start cheering her on. Come on, This is your spot. We're saving it for you. Come on, And so you watch her get in there, and you realize what it is she's just stressed out from the day. She just forgot, like I used to forget. She just forgot. And now she's like kind of checking me out, like she'd like to say something, but, So the little guy took her check, and he says to her, "What's your phone number?" And I said, "Don't give it to him. He won't call you anyway." And she starts to laugh, and I start to laugh, and suddenly we both realize what a joke this is. This is really funny stuff, And what it is you just forget. During the course of the day, you forget. That's why I come to meetings, because I need to be reminded. I need to remember. I looked up the word remember. It means to join up again. See, when I'm forgetting, I think I'm separate. I'm apart. And then I remember. I become a member of AA again. I join up every day on a new basis. And I become part of it again, and I realize that, hey, this is okay. Everything is happening just the way it's supposed to. And you get a chance to make a lot of jokes with people, and you get so in tune with AA, you are AA. And I don't mean that as like I'm AA, but I mean you're just so in tune to it. I'm walking down an aisle in a grocery market, and the little kid said, "Mommy, is there a God?" I said, "Read the chapter to the agnostic." Like you're gonna keep, just keep doing stuff like, it's just like throwaway stuff, I saw her mother, she's yanking this kid about pulling his arm off, and she's just forgetting. And they're in the pasta area there in the food market, and they got Paul Newman on his pasta there. And I looked up there and I said, "My God, I didn't even know he was missing." And it's just enough to make her stop and start to laugh, and she remembered. She remembered. Let go of this kid. He's not a dead weight. You don't have to drag him. And that's the way life is, and that's why I like hanging out with guys who are very visual like me. I have a little thing as you come into my house. It's a snow scene. And it's one of those snow things. You shake it up and all the snow goes in. You put it down, it settles out. And when guys come in and start telling me about stuff, I have them pick it up and shake it. Then put it down. Then we sit and watch it like kids. And then I ask the big, profound question. What have we learned here? Again, you shake it gets all shook up. You leave it alone, it settles out. Let go, let God. Yeah, sure. And then about 3 weeks later, you come out of the shower and you're watching the snow settle. You know he's been there. It's now part of his visual. I won't go when Ken's there. I'll wait till he's in the shower. But that's the way it is. You need those visuals. You need to be reminded that this is all a joke and we're the punchline. And you can miss the best joke of all. And Alcoholics Anonymous is a great reminder of the fact that this is about living life. In that book, Pass It On, also, it says Bill Wilson talks about the gift of life. It's a gift, and sometimes you get so focused on what we don't have and what isn't working that we lose track of the gift. I can tell you this from experience that, and I'm not wishing this on anyone, but you write down your problems tonight, whatever you think are the biggest problems in your life. and next week you go and have some kind of medical test done, and they tell you that you have some kind of a terminal disease, you'll take that list, tear it up, and throw it away. And you'll work on a whole new list, because you'll realize how insignificant that list was. And that's what AA is about. It's tearing up the insignificant, and it's focusing on the real. You know, it's coming to the realization, there's one who has all power. It doesn't say some of the power, most of the power, all power. So if this entity, whatever you want to call it, has all the power, there's none left for me. And I know that feeling. I don't like being powerless either, you know. It's like being voted most attractive in your cell block, you know. I mean, it's a nice honor, but you don't want to pick up the award, you know what I mean? And that's what it is, you know, and that's what AA does. It's a reminder to me that I am powerless over certain things, and that I just have to do the drill. And that whatever that reality is will take care of the deal. And I just have to let it go. And then I get to laugh a lot, because in watching you do what you do, I realize that I do the same thing. It's not like I'm smarter or better or craftier. I'm just aware. I'm aware that what you're doing is the same stuff I do. And it's an amazing little deal. And people are constantly bringing you tidbits of information about, is AA enough? I love that question. You don't even think about it until you, have gone through the steps, read all of our literature, and been sober 10 years. Then entertain if there's something else out there for you. Because you get people running around in the beginning, it's like changing and rotating the tires. You're missing the fact that the oil lamp is on. You know, and you watch people just kind of go in different directions. And then they find out, hey, this is where I belong. This is a very simple program. And it's so simple, it's easy to walk by it. I mean, it's real tough to tell someone who just spent $30,000, $40,000 and trying to get sober that we have a book that costs $5. That would aggravate me a little bit, you know. Yeah. So how much is the book? And if you can't afford it, we'll work out terms, you know. I go to these things now, and I realize when I'm on the plane and I'm traveling here, what a great thing it is for me to get a Friday for a few hours in a plane to be totally divorced of everything else except the fact that I'm going to an AA convention. And I usually bring along something that's spiritual to read for me. And what happens is I realize that there's so much I would like to do, but sometimes I get caught up in this world to the point that I forget to do the things that really mean the most to me. And if I didn't have you guys to come and serve as a spot check on that, I don't know what I'd do. I'd be at County Mental Health probably making belts, you know, because the last couple of years have just not been like, you're not on a winning streak. Things just are happening. And you're realizing that, wow, this is just life. It's not like I got the worst hand or a worse hand, but it's a hand you never expected to have to play, and suddenly you're playing it. And if it wasn't for the support of these little guys were doing wash for me who don't even do wash for themselves. You know, they were just coming out of the woodwork and seeing how they could be of help, and calling and telling me that, you know, you're in my prayers. And folks just don't know sometimes how important that stuff is, because they have an image of you that you're here a certain amount of time and things just don't happen to you. You know, you just rise above them all. That's not been my experience. My experience is that I've been here more, bigger chunks of life have come at me to be digested. And thank God I have this little deal that I do, you know. And when it's too overpowering, I stop and I pray about it, and I do all the things that I was taught to do here. And I do them on a repetitive basis until when that thing happens to me, I'm doing it almost automatically. I wish I could say I did it automatically, but it's almost automatic. And you get to have a lot of laughs. I mean, I now have guys that have given me gifts to make my life simple. I have socks that say right, right, right. Left, left, left. You know, I have a T-shirt that says this side out. I have underwear that says front and back. You know, and when I dress in that stuff, I laugh because it reminds me how simple it can be. And when the Dalai Lama, I always think of when the Dalai Lama was up in L.A. and he was at the forum there, and people were going to see him, and they paid $100 to get in to see him the year he won the Nobel Prize. And they had all these motivational speakers in front of the Dalai Lama, and they said all these great things and took 20 minutes to a half hour to say them. And when the Dalai Lama got up there, he just said, our primary purpose for being on this earth is to help one another. Then he turned around and started to go and sit down. And then it was like he had an afterthought, and he came back and he said, for those of us who are in a condition that doesn't allow that, our primary purpose is not to hurt anyone. And he went and sat down. And people are going, $100? I drove 80 miles. And the reality is, what else was there to say? If you can help, you help. And if you can't help, get out of the way. You know, and all of that truth comes down to what's in Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is just what the book said. It takes all these things and it's through a process of just absorption that it becomes part of a way of life. And I just, I don't know about you guys, I just never had that opportunity before. And I'm real glad that I had it to in this life, because I was getting to a point where I stood at the turning point, as the book said. And I could have gone either way. There's a fellow who's passed away out in California now who used to say life is a game of seconds and inches. And I don't think there's a true alcoholic who doesn't have that. It's a game of seconds and inches. You step this way or that way and everything is altered. And there's some things you just can't go back and undo. It's just, you just can't do them. You'd like to, but the people involved just aren't there. And you can't go back and undo that stuff. So the whole idea is to maximize it today and not to let up on the pedal, as they say. And I don't know about you guys, but I was a real alcoholic, you know. As I used to say, yeah, I drank stuff that not only hit the spot, it removed it, you know. And I had some codependency problems too, because when I was drinking, I used to say to people, excuse me, is my fly open? And they would say no, and I'd say, well, it should be, I'm peeing, you know. I thought I'd get them out of the way right away, you know. But I want to thank Frank and the group and everybody for letting me come here. This is where I belong. I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know a heck of a lot, but I know that if I stay in action and I do the things that are suggested here, I get results that are just unbelievable. I don't have to make up a life. I have a real life. I don't have to run away from the life I have. It's the life I want. I don't have to confuse people about who I am. I'm happy to tell them who I am today as best I know me. And that's always changing too, because there's just different levels of understanding. And I'm glad you guys are here. This is 50 years of joy in San Antonio. You have a little Alamo here, which probably was a bunch of alcoholics. You know? Well, I'm not going. You leaving late? No, I'm not going. You know? Yeah. They want this joint, they're going to have to take it, you know? Like, yeah. You know? And that's who we are. We're people who ordinarily would not mix. We're people who confuse what's real with what's illusionary. We're people who think we're in denial when we're in delusion. You know? It's not like we're denying the truth. We don't even know the truth, you know? You know? Our logo here should be excess is not enough, you know? You know, whatever it is, we need more, you know? We're confused about most things, but it never stops us from venturing an opinion, you know? And the only time I think a true alcoholic ever denies he doesn't know anything is when he's being indicted. You know, it wasn't me, it was a guy looked like me, I think, you know? But I had an experience a couple of months ago where we took a bunch of guys who are currently going through some stuff where it's a terminal situation for them, and we went up and we sat on a hill and we read how it works, and we read the vision for you. And then each guy kind of talked about where he was at. And they were all sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I looked around, I was so damn proud to belong to this thing. And when I got here, I didn't give a hoot. I just thought it was a place for me to catch up and catch my breath and get back in the race. And today I realized that it's not about running the race. It's about really just slowing down. It's about really enjoying. And so I would suggest to anyone here, if you have a resentment or anger against anyone, make it a point this weekend to call them. You'll surprise them if nothing else. And just over the phone, just tell them that whatever it is with them, it's no longer that way with you. And that you love them. Because tomorrow could be too late. It's just the way it happens. It's just too late. And I'm real glad you invited me to come here. I used to have a friend who came in and out of my house, and he was a little Hindu guy, Marish. And he used to put his hands together, and whenever he came into my home, he would bow and he would say, "Namaste, Ken." And when he left, he would say, "Namaste." And Namaste, translated loosely, means the God in me sees the God in you. And so, if the God in me is looking for the God in you, and the God in you is looking for the God in me, we just won't notice each other's character's defects so much. Because we'll be at a very, very different place. And that's what this has been for me. This has been a journey of expansion and awareness. When I got here, I had a very myopic view of what life was all about. And AA has given me a panoramic vision. I now see stuff that was there all the time, and I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see it because I had developed myopic eyes, and I drank a lot. And somehow I thought that my happiness had to be first and foremost. And what you guys taught me here is that when I put my happiness second, and I'm more desirous of your happiness, my happiness just tags along. So I want to thank you for letting me come tonight. I love you all very much. God bless you. Namaste.